Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Noreen Beatley, and I work with ICAST. Unfortunately, Steve was going to kick us off this morning, but he's running into some technical difficulties, so I'm going to do it instead. As I said, I'm with ICAST. ICAST, you'll learn a little bit more about who we are later in the presentation, but I first wanted to say thank you to the coalition for hosting this event. I think it's really important. In DC, as you all may or may not be aware of the BEPS, the new building energy performance standards that are going to be impacting how we move forward with our multifamily housing in the district. ICAST is actually based in Denver, but I am based in DC. And so I've been working with ICAST, with DOEE, with Pepco, and with Ginger and Anna at the Department of Housing and Community Development, and Ginger at Douglas Community Land Trust, to bring everybody together and start talking about how we can work together, how we can make sure that all of our multifamily affordable housing owners have what they need to meet BEPS and to move forward. So we're going to launch this and just get right into it. Lindsay is from the Building Innovation Hub, and she is working with DOEE to make sure that the folks in DC understand what they need to do to comply with BEPS. And she is from the Institute for Market Transformation. And I'm going to turn this over to you, Lindsay. And hang one second, and I'm going to do that.
Thanks, Noreen. And thank you guys very much for having me here with you today. So as Noreen said, my name is Lindsay Falaska. I'm the director of the Building Innovation Hub. We are here to talk about the latest regulatory changes that are affecting buildings in DC and what this means for you and your properties. So we'll dive into some of the specifics of these regulatory changes, what you need to know, how it affects you, what actions you can take, and then what resources are available to help. So next slide. Before we begin, I just want to take a minute to introduce the Hub, since we are a new-ish entity here in DC. We were created specifically to support the local building industry navigate these new building regulations, so breaking down the implications of the building energy performance standards. Next slide. So we are providing resources and tools and educational events like this one to help you make improvements to your buildings. And so we're certainly here to help you overcome today's hurdles and look at these regulations, but our job is to also help everyone take a long-term look at the implications of decisions and then feel empowered and confident in them as we work to improve buildings in DC. Next slide. And so with that, we'll get to the meat of the presentation. I'll start with a high-level overview of what the building energy performance standards are, and then talk about actions to take and what available resources there are. Next slide. So to start, it's important to note that what this is all about and the reason that these regulations exist is to combat climate change. So this is one way we can all say, with what will eventually be data as concrete evidence, that our individual actions made a difference, and here's how, which I think is really powerful. So DC has a vision to be carbon neutral and climate resilient by 2050. And there are a number of ways the city is working to meet those goals, one of which is looking at the building stock in DC. So since buildings account for over 70% of the district's greenhouse gas emissions, reducing the amount of energy used in buildings is paramount in order to achieve those climate commitments. So the Building Energy Performance Standards, or BEPS for shorthand, are a regulatory tool that the district is using to help meet those green building and climate goals. Next slide. So how do we measure and reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings? So DC is tracking its greenhouse gas emissions from buildings through its benchmarking program. Next slide. So privately owned buildings over 50,000 square feet have been benchmarking performance since 2013. Next slide. The benchmarking rules were recently updated to include provisions for smaller buildings to be required to do the same. So starting this year, buildings over 25,000 square feet are now required to benchmark. So that means reporting next year. Next slide. That size threshold drops down to 10,000 square feet in 2024. And benchmarking is an important part of BEPS because you can't manage what you don't measure. And so this is where BEPS comes in. So using this benchmarking data, BEPS is working to measurably reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the district. So next slide. So what is BEPS? A BEPS, the Building Energy Performance Standards, sets a minimum threshold for energy performance for existing buildings. So these thresholds, or standards, if you will, are based on and measured against a building's demonstrated energy performance as shown in their benchmarking data. So as we said in DC, large building owners, buildings greater than 50,000 square feet, have been benchmarking energy and water performance for nearly a decade. And now that benchmarking data is being put to good use. So under BEPS, the district aggregates individual building performance information per property type to establish a standard for that building type to meet. Buildings that do not meet that standard for their property type will be required to improve their performance over the course of a compliance cycle and demonstrate their accomplishments at the end. So to give an example, let's pretend DC has 10 multifamily buildings in the entire city, all of which have naturally varying levels of performance. So looking at the graph right there. The district aggregates information about these individual multifamily housing buildings and uses it to find the median level of performance. So if your building is performing better than the median for multifamily housing, you are not required to take action under BEPS. If your building is performing worse than the median for multifamily housing, you will be required to improve your performance. Next slide. And for reference, the standard or median right now for multifamily housing buildings is an Energy Star score of 66. Next slide. So to know if you are compliant, you are measuring your Energy Star score from your 2019 energy benchmarking data against this standard. So if your building's Energy Star score is above a 66, your building is compliant and you're not required to take action. If your building's Energy Star score is below a 66, you do not meet the standard and you will need to improve performance over a compliance cycle. If you don't know what your building's Energy Star score is, there is a publicly available platform that lists all buildings that have been benchmarking, and we can send that website link out later as well. Next slide. So underperforming buildings, so buildings that are performing worse than the median, will have to improve their performance during what's called a compliance cycle, and it will also need to demonstrate that improvement at the end through benchmarking. Next slide. So more specifically, we have recently entered into the first compliance cycle of BEPS, which started January 1. Buildings that do not meet the standard will have to both improve performance and provide benchmarking data to prove that by January 1, 2027. So also of note in the draft rules, because the rules are still in draft form, there is a process for affordable housing building owners to apply for an exemption from or delay of the deadline. It's important to note that at the end of this compliance cycle, the district will reevaluate aggregated building performance and likely raise the level of performance for the next cycle of BEPS. So this is why, even if your building is performing well now or just over the standard, you want to maintain or increase performance over time to ensure that you'll be performing better than the next standard that's released. Next slide. So who does this apply to? BEPS builds on the district's benchmarking program. So if you are mandated to benchmark your property, the BEPS program applies to your building. Next slide. So the first BEPS period will only apply to buildings larger than 50,000 square feet. Next slide. Eventually, buildings over 25,000 square feet and then eventually over 10,000 square feet will be required to benchmark. And then all of these properties will eventually be phased into the BEPS program as well. Next slide. So as we saw in the earlier slide, only buildings who do not meet the standard will be required to improve performance during the compliance cycle. And there are a number of compliance pathways to choose from. I'm not going to go into the specifics of each pathway just because for timing, but I do want to note that DOEE is working on targeted compliance pathways that are unique for multifamily affordable housing in order to acknowledge different circumstances. And so we are expecting more detailed information about this to be released very soon and can follow up once we know more firm details. The first deadline to note associated with BEPS is that building owners whose properties don't meet the standard will have until February 1st, 2023 to choose a compliance pathway. The district wants to know that people are thinking about this early in the compliance cycle and not waiting till the end. And it's also a way to encourage people to do so. So that date is less than 2 years away and it will go by fast. The time will go fast. So we're encouraging people to start thinking about and developing a plan to understand which pathway is most suitable for your property. Next slide. So just a little bit of updates because I did mention that the rules are still in draft form. Next slide. So the BEPS rules are in draft form after being out for public comment. However, we're only anticipating tweaks to existing language and no really major overhaul to the rules. But we do expect that once the rules and associated guidebooks are released, there will be a lot more details to understand and sort of explain to everyone. Unlike the rules, the standards have been finalized. So the Energy Star score of 66 is firm and has been finalized. Even though the rules aren't finalized yet, the clock is already ticking, and there are certain things that can be done now to ensure that you don't fall inadvertently behind on compliance. Next slide. So just some things that we are encouraging people to do now to make sure that they stay ahead of what's happening. Next slide. If there is one major takeaway that there's one major takeaway you can get from all this, please have your energy benchmarking data verified. It will help you understand if your data is correct, how your building is actually performing, and can inform your strategy for compliance going forward, and hopefully prevent major unknowns in the future. So this effort would be voluntary now, although eventually it will be mandated to have your benchmarking data verified. So please, please, please have your benchmarking data verified as a first step to make sure you know how your building is performing. The next thing we want people to do is to understand the different compliance pathway options to help craft a plan to ensure your building will be compliant at the end of the cycle and to improve performance to stay ahead of future cycles as well. Next slide. So just a few available resources we have on our site that can help. Next slide. If you're not at a place where you can or want to hire someone to audit your benchmarking data, we do have a resource which outlines a way to do a high-level check of your data to see if there are any major red flags. Next slide. We also have a guide that tells you what you can glean from looking at accurate benchmarking data, which can help inform compliance path selection and various options to improve performance. Next slide. We also have a plain speak article on BEPS, on the BEPS ordinance language. So we basically pull out the relevant and important pieces and sort of write it in not ordinance language. And we do update it regularly as new information is released from DOE. Next slide. And lastly, we have a lot of other resources, but for specific for this conversation, we have a funding and financing map, which outlines all of the different incentives and rebates and loan options that can help pay for these green building improvements. I do also want to note that DOE received federal stimulus money to support multifamily housing owners with BEPS compliance specifically. And so those funds will be available later this year as DOE is currently working out some of the details and design of those funding programs. They do hope to have the details released very soon. So that's exciting, especially for this audience, that there is an influx of money that will be made available. That is also one way in which I can also lateral the ball over to our next speaker as well to talk about some of the financing programs that they have. So I just want to thank the members on the last slide for having, thank you to our members who help support our work and our mission and allow us to deliver content like this. And then thank you, last slide, for having me here today.
Thank you, Lindsay. That's great stuff. Really good information. For the panelists, I know that we have a couple of questions here, but I think that what we're going to try to do is hold them till the end. I will say, so we do have Ravi has answered one of them. That's great. Ravi is my boss at ICAST about who needs to comply with BEPS. But so we're going to turn this over to Imran Bell, who works with Pepco and is helping launch the Pepco program and is managing this with ICAST to help the multifamily owners actually comply with BEPS. And it's a new Pepco program, and I'm going to pass it over to Imran to start talking tell us a little bit more about it.
Cool. Thank you, Noreen.
And hang on one second. There we go.
Great. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Imran, and I'm the program manager for the Pepco Multifamily Income Eligibility Retrofit program. So like Noreen said, this program launched at the start of the year, and we partnered with ICAST as our program implementers to perform whole building retrofits for multifamily properties in the district. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
So to qualify for this program, first you must be a Pepco DC customer with at least 3 units on the property. And there are three different ways that you're defined as income eligible. So the first is if you participate in any subsidized program, you'd be eligible. The second is if the majority of the households on the property earn less than 80% of the area median income. So for example, for a family of four, that 80% level is just about $100,000. And the third option is similar. It's if the average rents on the property are less than 80% of the average market rent. So again, you'd be income eligible per any of these definitions. Next slide. So this program is focused on whole building deep energy retrofits. So we're looking at comprehensive measures to improve energy efficiency. So some of those measures would include heat pump installation for both HVAC and domestic hot water purposes. We also offer gas incentives for items such as high efficiency furnaces and boilers. We assist with other installations like windows and insulation as well. And while this is a comprehensive retrofit focus, we also provide incentives for direct installation measures such as lighting upgrades or low flow devices. Next slide. So some of the benefits of this program, first of all, is obviously the cash incentives. So we can cover up to 80% of the project cost. And again, that's through both electric and gas ECM incentives. And as Lindsay described earlier, this goes a long way to help your property reach BEPS compliance. So it definitely brings tangible improvements to the property itself. It reduces your operating costs and it makes it a more attractive place to live for your tenants. And ICAST makes it a very smooth process through their one-stop shop approach. So to talk more about that, I will hand it over here to ICAST Program Manager Ed McElvain.
All right, thank you, Imran. Yep, I will discuss the ICAST is mainly the implementer for this Pepco program. And we have what's called a one-stop shop, which is essentially a simple and hassle-free, cost-effective service that we can take a property owner or manager through every phase of the project from beginning to end. Starting with a no-cost property assessment. We'll go to your property and do a comprehensive site visit and check the entire property structure and surroundings, evaluating all the energy systems and that impact its energy consumption from lighting, plumbing, shell, envelope, appliances, and HVAC. Once we're done that site visit and assessment, we will develop a scope of work with recommendations for upgrades and how those might save the property energy and money. We have a value engineering. So what value engineering is we will, when we make those upgrades and recommendations based on the assessment, we make recommendations and the engineers will recommend specific upgrades based on the energy savings that the new equipment will incur, and those energy savings will also result in greater incentives. We also will help with, this webinar is about BEPS, ICAST can help the property owner and manager plan on a project that will meet the BEPS standards or beat the BEPS standards. So we will be heavily involved in helping property owners and managers meet those standards. We also can get involved in helping property owners or managers access any available incentives. With the Pepco program, we have access to both incentives for electric and gas savings. So in addition to that, we have access to all a variety of different incentives that are offered throughout the district, whether it's DCSCU or grants such as the one that Lindsay mentioned with DOEE. So we are there to help property owners and managers move forward the project with these incentives. We also can help you look for green building loans from Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. ICAST also has a CDFI where it has can offer low-cost financing to energy efficient property owners and managers that want to do energy efficient upgrades. The other thing ICAST offers as part of its one-stop shop is coordinating with subcontractors. We can help design as part of designing the scope of work. We can show the subcontractors the design specs so that they can bid on the project. We can also kind of oversee the project, and we will also do inspections at the end of the project to make sure that the work was done completely and with regards to the scope of work that was developed. So who is ICAST? A little quick slide here on ICAST, the background of ICAST. We started as a spinoff from the University of Colorado in Boulder in 2002. We started out as kind of more of a research organization, but fast forward today, we are involved in many programs, including this program, which is similar to a utility DSM program. We also are involved in state weatherization programs, low-income solar, turnkey DER, that's distributed energy resources, which includes battery storage, solar, energy efficiency, electric vehicles, and energy management systems. So we're getting involved in a lot more things, but ICAST, although based in Denver, has a presence nationally, and we have programs in every region. In every region that we're in, we have a local single point of contact and some field personnel as well. So it's very important for us to have a local presence in those markets. Our goal this year is to do upgrades and do energy efficiency work on 25,000 low to moderate income households. So that's a little bit of a background on ICAST. What's the process? Well, given that we have that one-stop shop, we can take you again through the whole entire process from the beginning to the end, and starts with the energy audit. As I mentioned before, that's that on-site assessment. Well, we will assess your property for potential energy upgrades. Then we create the scope of work and the estimate. And you see the two arrows there. That indicates this is more of an iterative process where the engineers will create the scope, come up with recommendations based on the energy savings. Obviously, the greater the energy savings, the greater the incentive, the better chance you have of meeting the BEPS standard. So we'll make those recommendations, then we'll work with the property owner or manager to fine tune the scope to what the owner or manager wants to proceed with. And that's so there's some back and forth there with the development of the scope and the finalizing the scope. The next piece is we will help with the project itself, such as working with contractors and so forth to get bids, to educate them on the program, to do inspections and so forth. So we will take we'll take you through that whole process to the inspection, and finally, when the inspection is complete, the project is complete, the work is done, inspection is passed, then we will process all the rebate paperwork to get those incentives to the project, and then we will complete the project. Thanks, Noreen. I keep forgetting to tell you to advance, but you seem to know. So why do this now? Why is this important now? And Lindsay kind of indicated why it is, but this program is not going to be around forever. There's only so much funding to it. When that funding is gone, it's gone. So this particular project it's good to take advantage now. There's some great incentives, like I said, on electric and gas measures, and fuel switching as well. I saw a question come up in the chat about that. So limited funds, BEPS benchmarking, and Lindsay kind of alluded to this. This process, although your building may not require to be completed for several years, the project may not be completed for several years, but the whole process takes a long time, starting with the benchmarking, verification, the decision on the compliance cycle, the actual project itself, the verification takes a while. So better to get ahead of the curve and start now. And as everybody probably knows, there are fines involved for being non-compliant. So might as well get started now to avoid the costs later. So these folks at the bottom here are your local single point of contact. We have Joe and Cheryl, DC based. Please reach out to them. We will send their contact information in the follow-up email after the presentation, so you can reach out to them. Next slide. So I don't know, Noreen, if there are time for questions now. If
so
not,
I think the best thing to do is actually keep us moving, and we'll hear from Anna at the Department of Housing and Community Development next. And what we'd like to do is kind of hold the questions till the end, but please continue to put them in the chat. We'll also open it up a little bit more towards the end. But as we continue going through the presentations, definitely think about some of the things you've heard and what you would like to follow up on. And so we're now going to move to Anna Van Balen from the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Anna Van Balen. I'm the Housing Preservation Officer here at the Department of Housing and Community Development. Next slide. And so, although I'm going to give a brief background as to where we're at with BEPS, but the rest of my presentation will really just focus on some of our existing programs that could help with repairs beyond BEPS. But let me start here and basically saying we have been collaborating with DOEE to best determine how to support projects that need assistance. Currently, what we're thinking is integrating BEPS with DHCD's QAP, or our Qualified Allocation Plan, and our consolidated RFP, and specifically to support projects that are coming through our NOFA process. But we also expect to be working with some of our partners to provide financial and technical support, be it through DOE or DCSEU, to help projects already subject to an affordability covenant or naturally occurring projects to comply with BEPS. And so we expect to have more information in the coming, probably in the fall, once our budget is approved and further consideration is made on this specifically. So please stay tuned for more information from our department. Next slide. And so I'm just going to quickly talk through our Housing Preservation Fund for those who are not familiar with this program. Next slide. Since about 2018, we have been working to create a public-private fund. And so it's been now 2 years in existence, and we've been able to assist projects and preserve them so we can ensure their long-term sustainability in the future. And so the Housing Preservation Fund is a 3 to 4 year loan below market. And it allows for preservation of with an LTV up to 125%, where a minimum of 50% of the units must be affordable at 80% of MFI or below. And in return, we put a 10-year affordability covenant on the project. What's unique to this fund, one, DHCD does not directly administer this program. We work with 3 fund managers, and I'll get to who they are in a second. But what it does is it's primarily used for acquisition, but it can be used for pre-development costs as well as critical repairs for our occupied multifamily properties. So if you have any questions about this, I highly encourage you to talk to one or all of our fund managers, which are on the next slide. And that includes capital impact partners. And I've included the contact information for our folks at each of the different fund managers, also LISC, DC, as well as the Low Income Investment Fund. Okay, next slide. And you can also go to our website to get additional contact information there as well. And so secondly, just quickly want to familiarize yourselves with our small building program if you're not familiar with it. Next slide. And so this program specifically tries to assist low-income landlords as well as limited equity cooperatives that have up to 20 housing units to address some of the substandard housing conditions that may exist at the property. And so we work with owners who have no more than 3 rental properties and whose income does not exceed 125% of MFI. But we're also working with limited equity cooperatives that are at least 75% occupied, who again, at least 50% of the housing units must be affordable with incomes no more than 80% of MFI. And what we do in return is that we will provide up to a $200,000 grant to assist with the repairs needed at the project. And so the process on the next slide, you can go to the next slide. So what we'll be able to do is we will address one major building component. So be it replace the roof, replace the boiler, address waterproofing at the site, as well as several additional minor repairs. So it's not intended to be a rehab program. It is really intended to be a critical repair program. Next slide. And so essentially, we request that people come to us for a pre-meeting. From there, we will send out a scope writer to do a full assessment of the property. We do request that the owners or the limited equity cooperative go through a mandatory property management course that we have developed with the National Center for Housing Management. And then from there, we will provide the grant of up to $200,000 for the property, as well as add a 5-year affordability covenant. And then we will work to obtain a contractor to conduct the repairs, and then we will do some compliance and follow-up afterwards. Next slide. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me directly here. Otherwise, you can find all of this information on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. So we are now going to move over to Ginger Rump, who is with the Douglas Community Land Trust. And Ginger's going to give you a little bit of information about how you can maintain affordability in the district.
All right, thank you. And this is great. Glad to be here on behalf of the Douglas Community Land Trust members and board. And so in talking with Ravi earlier, thinking about some potential synergy as we think about new incentives and resources. But ultimately, I think most of us, we're fundamentally here not because of buildings, or maybe some of us really care about compliance, but fundamentally we're here because of the people residing in the buildings and really people who are living on this planet. Because climate change is, of course, adversely, disproportionately impacting the most vulnerable of our members, and particularly Black and Brown folks in low-income communities. And so the changes that are being made because of these new regulations are really intended to help to build resilience and help all of us here on the planet. I think that's worth reminding all of us. And I think there was some, we like to, jumping right into this, the Douglas Community Land Trust is around, it is about racial and economic equity. We use the levers of permanent or lasting affordability combined with collective stewardship. And you can flip to the next slide there. The idea is, it really came out of the civil rights movement. And so the foundation is specifically around community control and trying to build both a real equity, and you can flip to the next slide, an equity in terms of both power and in terms of the impact of the decisions that get made. So here you're looking at a picture of our tripartite board of directors. It is the Land Trust really is built as a membership organization, and the members elect this board. There's always people who represent the lessees in our properties, and you can flip ahead here. The way that this works, of course, you may have heard, it is both, can be ownership of land or a deed restricted covenant, and then a 99-year lease, because the idea really is to hold properties affordable in perpetuity. And you can see the variety of types of buildings with which we can work. Flipping ahead, we are just a little difference in how we keep things affordable, right? So over time, you may have to continue to invest subsidy. With the land trust model, you're looking at keeping the affordability over time. So it's just another way of looking at both buildings, keeping affordability and building supply in the market. It's another tool for all of us to think about moving ahead. We pay it forward. I like to look at, again, just reminding us who we're doing this for. It's not just for this generation, but for the next generation, and flipping ahead there. Really, while the land trust does have equity and can contribute to that affordability gap, whether that is in the development piece or the ongoing, so holding down debt or other types of equity that you might have to repay. Ours can also fill both that initial or the longer term operating gap of funding, but critically it is the ongoing stewardship that happens over time. So it's both asset management or kind of building based, as well as building assets of people there. And so without getting into too many details, a lot of it goes hand in hand with some of the other, a lot of the other programs. And we do work, of course, with limited equity co-ops and other types of multifamily buildings on the both rental and owner. And flipping ahead there, we currently have 219 units in our portfolio with a pretty robust pipeline. Flipping ahead, we really just it's just a I like to end on some nice pictures here. We came across this from one of our limited equity housing co-ops that was looking to do some energy retrofits sooner rather than later. Doesn't cover the cost. It's because some other things came up in doing the assessments. And so if there is an alignment with you as building owners or co-ops or some other folks you know in the field, if there's an alignment with the types of things that the Douglas Community Land Trust holds as core values, then we may potentially be able to fill a bit of that equity gap that might show up as you do these energy retrofits. And certainly the ongoing stewardship that we consider to be the most critical part of our services. So I will leave it there without getting into other details. Thanks again. And thanks to ICAST, Pepco, and CNHED for pulling everybody together.
Ginger, thank you so much. I think that, and I want to thank all the panelists. We have a couple of questions up, and I will launch them. So is the conversion from gas to electric, HVAC, and hot water heating covered under the Pepco program? And I think either,
I'll
yeah.
answer that. This is Ravi.
Oh,
Short answer is yes.
actually, hang on one second, because we didn't introduce. I'm going to introduce you very quickly. Ravi Malhotra is the founder and president of ICAST, and he's on with us as well. So he can answer some of these questions, and you'll see in the chat that he has answered some of them. But just so folks know who Ravi is, because you've been referenced already. So go ahead. Yeah.
Well, the short answer is yes. And we can, whether it's viable or not, it will depend on the property. But once again, as Ed said, right, allow us to come in, look at the assessment. It's at no cost to you. And we can come back to you with a plan and telling you what the exact conversion might entail, right? And whether it makes sense or not for you to do it.
Great, thank you. There's another question, and I'm not quite sure that we're going to be able to address this, but perhaps Lindsay knows, or Imran. The question is, will DOEE or Pepco attempt to eliminate the DC Public Service Commission prohibition for electric sub-metering for residential dwellings? Since I don't know that Pepco would make that decision, and I don't know that DOEE, we don't have, unfortunately, anyone on that could answer that directly.
I'll take a swag at it.
Okay.
The sub-metering law is actually governed by FERC, the Federal Energy Regulation Commission. So it has nothing to do with DOE or Pepco. And so that's where that regulation comes from. And that, to our knowledge, hasn't changed. And so BEPS says they're two completely different things. So nothing has changed there. That would be my answer.
Great. So then we have another one. Older properties that generally don't have the electric capacity to upgrade to all electric heating and cooling systems. So the question is, are there funds available to help with assist with heavy up?
The short and quick answer is yes. You just heard from Ginger and Anna on the kind of help that they can provide. Obviously, the Pepco program is driven from energy savings, but obviously doing that upgrade as needed is part and parcel of it. So, but we'll come back. And again, once again, I'll say the same thing, right? Get our guys up there. Let's help build a proposal so you have an idea of exactly what it is, right? Let's not just talk generalities, but get into the specific for your property and what it would entail, and then where we can find the funds. That's our job. So allow us to do that, and we can get back to you and give you a plan.
So are there any other questions out there? You can either raise your hand or you can type it into the chat. You know, we have the people here that can, you know, really address some of those questions that maybe you haven't even thought of yet. The BEPS
Another one just came in.
Yeah. Oh, good. Okay.
And the question was, can you talk
Yeah.
more about verifying your data for BEPS? Find energy benchmarking doesn't make sense in our portfolio. Our oldest properties have the best scores and the newest have the worst. So that's one that came in. Lindsay, you want to address that, and I'll address it after you.
Sure, I think that's a good point, and which is exactly why we ask people to verify their data, just to make sure it is accurate. I will say that when DOEE was crafting the rules for BEPS, they did do a study on building age and energy performance and found that there wasn't a significant correlation, so that an older building doesn't necessarily mean worse performing writ large. Right? I know there are specifics where that is different, but that's why we tell people to verify their data, because if it doesn't make sense, there's probably an error somewhere, or a missing meter, or timelines are potentially off. And so this is exactly why we have people have even a third party look at the data to make sure that it was input correctly. There's a lot of places that errors can throw things off, especially as BEPS takes effect. We want people to make sure that the information that they're using that puts them in the compliance cycle or out of the compliance cycle is accurate. And then once the data is accurate, you'll know what to do with your building after it. So yes, please have your data verified. And we can certainly help facilitate if you need some help finding someone or need some suggestions.
And what I'll add is, if you're a qualified property, as Imran mentioned, then that's our job. We will, and we're on Lindsay's database too, but essentially the Pepco program is going to pay for us helping you do that verification and make sure that your benchmarking is indeed accurate. And To your point, we've seen the same thing that you pointed out in your question. Some of this isn't making sense, where some of the older, worse properties have had very high scores and vice versa. So we are in the process of cleaning them up for the folks that we are currently engaged with. Absolutely.
And then there's a question about, are there incentives for water savings?
Well, short answer is yes. The long answer is the Pepco program has incentives for water savings if they also bring energy savings with it. So examples would be shower heads, aerators, low flow devices like that. It does not have any incentive for toilets or landscaping. But then there are other incentives available for those kinds of things. And once again, our job is to help you find those. So there's definitely incentives. And then I was going to add the last piece is there's all of those, I'm not sure you want to call them incentives, but the Fannie, Freddie, FHA green loan programs are driven by energy and water savings. And those are, as I said, you can call them incentives with a lower mortgage rate. Sorry, go ahead.
And I will note on our funding and financing map that I referenced, you can search for just water savings. We did pull that as part of the one of the search features as well.
Ravi, I wanted to make sure we didn't miss this one. There's one question that asks, how are rebates calculated? What type of upgrade or energy efficiency product may qualify for full 80% coverage? So I can let Ravi go into more detail, but it is a tiered incentive structure. And so generally the highest cost measures, the measures with the highest expected useful life, we offer the largest incentive for those.
Absolutely. So what I'll add in terms of additional detail is, and I've referenced this before, the incentives or rebates, as they might be called, are driven by the energy savings. So we're converting, whether they're therm savings, gas or electric, we're converting them all to kWh, and that's just for simplicity's sake. But if there's savings to be had, there's an incentive for it. So that's rule number one. We don't care where or how it comes from. It's our job to calculate those. And we're using a specific TRM, more details than any of you guys want, but I'll step into it. And there's a method in how we go about doing it, approved by Pepco and the task force, etc. And then, as Imran said, we're looking for remember, it's a deep retrofit program. So we're highly incentivizing those deep retrofit, high savings, high cost, high useful life, like HVAC, hot water systems, windows, those kinds of things have a higher incentive per kWh of saving. And then lights or shower heads, aerators have a lower incentive per kWh of savings because they have lower estimated useful life, or EUL, as Imran referred to. But it's basically formulaic, and any and all measures that you might do that can save energy are open and under consideration.
So it looks like another question. I don't think that, does the Pepco funding allow for conversion from gas to electric?
I think we covered that earlier.
Oh, sorry, you already did answer that. Sorry. I'm trying to keep up.
But there's a second part to that question I noticed there.
Yes. Are there issues quantifying? Yeah.
Electrical savings if the benchmarking includes gas. So the benchmarking includes gas and electric. I think, Lindsay, you must have covered that, right? That when you use the EUI as energy use intensity or the score, it actually uses both gas and electric. You have to have both of that data if you have a property that's using gas and electric. So benchmarking includes both of those. And so the program provides incentives for both gas and electric. This doesn't discriminate. Energy savings are energy savings.
Okay. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, but we do want to make sure people know that we will be available. Lindsay is definitely your go-to person for the hub. And ICAST folks are, as we said, available to talk to you and come to check out your property. And then Ravi and Ed at ICAST, and as well as Imran, I'll probably turn to us, but you know, we are here to answer all your questions, as are Ginger and Anna. So there are a couple things that have been posted in the chat about where you might be able to find more information about the programs, but definitely feel free to reach out to us because that is what we're here, you know, to help you make that transition and help you implement some of these updates. Ravi, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I think we said that a copy is going to be sent out for the webinar, but we're recording it to where? Do we know where we're going to put the recording if somebody wants to?
Yes. What is going to happen is the coalition is recording it right now, and they will post it to their YouTube page. And then we will also, all the panelists will have links to it, and it will be available for them to put up on each of their sites if they so choose. But the recording will be available through CNHED.
The last thing I will add is, if it is the last thing, is you've heard that from Imran and Ed too, that there's limited amount of money as far as this Pepco program goes. And we filed our final program design document in June. And here we are in July, a month later, and almost 40% of the funding is in our pipeline. So it's first come, first serve for those of you who do want to utilize this incentive in this offering of incentives and fund free money, if you will.
Right. And Ravi, along those lines, Ravi and I were talking to Steve yesterday, and we do understand that most of the members of the coalition, you know, you guys are you don't have as much access to a lot of the funding and folks to help you out. So that is why we wanted to work with the coalition to make sure that you knew that we were available and that we can help you do this. And we know that you may need a little bit of extra help because you don't have, most of you are not the big developers. You don't have that big staff to kind of look at this and figure it out. But there are resources to help you make this work. And on that, I don't think that there are any more questions in the chat. I hope that we've answered your questions thus far, but as I said, please feel free to reach out to all of us. And I want to thank all of you for participating and joining in. We hope that this was helpful. We hope that we've given you something to think about, and we absolutely hope that you'll tap into these resources and that we can help you, especially with funding, you know, because we know that that's where the hardest place to find to move your programs forward. And on that, I think I'd like to say thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Noreen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.